Ebony felt like the happiest woman in Lagos when she moved into her husband Kahine's beautiful home. Everything looked like a dream: shiny floors, big rooms, and a garden filled with flowers. Kahine was loving and caring, and for a while, Ebony believed she had stepped into a perfect life. Her mother-in-law, Mama Ronk, welcomed her with hugs and sweet words, calling her my daughter. But behind those smiles, Ebony sensed something wasn't right. There was a coldness in Mama Ronk's eyes, a kind of hidden dislike that showed up in small ways. A sigh here, a sharp comment there. Still, Ebony stayed respectful and gentle, believing love could change hearts. Days turned into weeks, and the atmosphere began to shift. Mama Ronk started finding faults in everything Ebony did. If the food was too salty, she complained. If the living room wasn't arranged her way, she grumbled. During family gatherings, she whispered to relatives, saying Ebony came from a poor background and didn't deserve her son. Ebony tried to ignore it, hoping Kahine would notice, but he stayed silent, torn between his wife and his mother. Each insult chipped away at Ebony's peace, yet she kept her head high, refusing to respond with anger. One morning, everything exploded. Mama Ronk barged into their room, shouting that Ebony should pack her things and leave. Her voice echoed through the house as she accused Ebony of using her son for wealth. Neighbors gathered outside, watching the scene unfold. Ebony stood quietly, her heart aching, as Mama Ronk threw her suitcase into the street and shouted that she came with nothing and would leave with nothing. Kahine tried to stop her, but guilt and tears from his mother silenced him. Ebony walked back inside, picked up a brown envelope, and handed it to Mama Ronk. "Please read this before I go," she said softly. Inside was the house deed, written in Ebony's name. Everyone gasped. The same home she was being thrown out of actually belonged to her. The truth unfolded. Ebony had used her late uncle's inheritance to buy and renovate the house when Kahine's business failed. Mama Ronk's knees weakened as shame washed over her. Later, she begged for forgiveness, learning a lesson she would never forget. Never look down on a humble heart, for grace always wins quietly. Mama Ronk never missed a chance to remind Ebony of where she came from. Every day felt like a new test of patience. At breakfast, she would complain about Ebony's cooking, saying, "Women from the village can't make proper city food." When visitors came, she pretended to smile, but found a way to slip in cruel comments. "My son was too kind," she would say loudly, pretending to joke. "He married a nobody and made her somebody." The laughter that followed felt like tiny knives cutting through Ebony's heart. She would smile politely, pretending not to hear, but deep inside, she felt smaller each day. Kahine, the man she loved, saw it all. He heard the insults, the sharp tone, the fake sweetness, but he stayed quiet. Sometimes he would squeeze Ebony's hand under the table, a silent apology that never changed anything. He didn't want to hurt his mother, and he didn't want to lose peace at home. Ebony understood his struggle, yet every time he stayed silent, it hurt more than the words themselves. The home that once felt warm was now filled with tension and unspoken pain. Mama Ronk became bolder as the days went by. She mocked Ebony's clothes, her accent, even the way she greeted people. She loved to tell stories about Kahine's ex-girlfriend, a rich banker's daughter, reminding everyone of what her son could have had. Ebony listened quietly, fighting the tears that burned behind her eyes. She refused to argue or defend herself, believing her dignity was worth more than shouting matches. At night, when everyone slept, Ebony cried softly into her pillow, asking herself what she had done wrong. She remembered her mother's words. "A humble woman's strength is in her silence." Those words gave her courage to keep going. Even when her heart felt heavy, she continued to treat Mama Ronk with respect, serving her meals, greeting her warmly, and never speaking back. What no one knew was that Ebony's silence was not weakness. It was power waiting for the right moment to speak. And soon, the woman everyone called a nobody would show them just how wrong they were. One morning, Ebony was in the kitchen making breakfast when the door burst open. Mama Ronk stormed in, her face full of anger, shouting at the top of her voice, "Get out of my son's house. You've taken enough from us." Her voice was so loud it echoed down the street. Pots rattled on the counter as Ebony froze, the spoon slipping from her hand. She turned slowly, her heart pounding, unsure what had sparked such rage this time. Before she could speak, Mama Ronk pointed at her with shaking hands and screamed that she was ungrateful, lazy, and only married Kahind for his money. Abeni tried to calm her, but the insults kept coming like fire. You have no shame. Mama ronke yelid. You think you can sit in comfort while my son works hard for you? Tears filled Abeni's eyes, but she refused to cry in front of her. Kahind came running from the bedroom, confused and panicked, trying to stop his mother, but she pushed him aside. The shouting grew louder, and soon curious neighbors began to gather outside the gate. Some whispered, some recorded on their phones, and others just watched in silence. Abeni's heart broke as she saw her suitcase thrown onto the veranda. Clothes spilled out, scattering in the morning breeze. Mama Ronk's voice cut through the air again. You came with nothing, and you will leave with nothing, she shouted, her face twisted with bitterness. Abeni stood there, trembling, feeling every eye on her. The woman who had once promised to treat her like a daughter was now throwing her out like a stranger. Kahind stood between them, pleading with his mother, but she ignored him completely. The humiliation was unbearable. Abeni wanted to scream, but her voice wouldn't come out. Her whole body felt numb. She looked at the crowd outside, at the house she had called home, and at the man she loved, now powerless before his mother. In that painful silence, something inside her changed. The fear in her eyes slowly turned into calm determination. She didn't shout back or argue. Instead, she took a deep breath and decided she would leave with her head held high. But before walking away, she would make sure the truth was known, and everyone would see who truly owned that house. Mama Ronk's anger reached its peak as she dragged Abeni's suitcase down the hallway and threw it out through the front door. Clothes scattered across the ground, landing on the dusty street as neighbors began to peek through their windows. The sound of the heavy suitcase hitting the floor made Abeni flinch. You came with nothing, and you will leave with nothing, Mama Ronk shouted, her voice trembling with fury. Her words echoed through the quiet neighborhood, cutting deep into Abeni's heart. People stopped on the road, whispering and pointing, their eyes filled with curiosity and pity. Abeni stood frozen near the door, her hands shaking as she tried to hold back tears. The woman she had once called Mama was now her greatest humiliation. Mama Ronk kept shouting, listing every little thing she claimed Abeni had taken: food, clothes, comfort, even her son's love. You used your fake kindness to trap my son, she cried. Now your time in this house is over. Abeni opened her mouth to speak, but Kahind rushed in, trying to stop his mother. Mama, please calm down, he begged, his voice breaking. This isn't right. Let's talk about it. But Mama Ronk turned to him, her expression changing instantly. She burst into tears, clutching her chest dramatically. After all I've done for you, Kahind, you're choosing her over me? She sobbed loudly. Your poor old mother who raised you alone? Her crying drew sympathy from the onlookers, making Kahind freeze. The guilt in his eyes was heavy, and though he wanted to defend Abeni, he couldn't bring himself to go against his mother. Abeni watched the scene quietly, her heart breaking at his silence. She had dreamed of a family filled with love and respect, but now she stood in the middle of chaos and shame. Her dignity felt torn apart in front of strangers. Mama Ronk pointed at the door again, shouting for her to leave immediately. For a moment, Abeni thought about walking away in tears, but something inside her told her to stay calm. She wiped her eyes, took a deep breath, and decided that before stepping out, the truth would be known, and every person watching would soon see who truly owned that house. Instead of shouting or crying, Abeni quietly turned away from the crowd and walked back into the house. Her steps were slow but steady, her face calm though her heart was beating fast. Everyone expected her to scream or beg, but she did neither. Inside the bedroom, she opened the top drawer and pulled out a brown envelope that had been hidden there for months. She held it close to her chest for a moment, then walked back into the living room where Mama Ronk and Kahind stood surrounded by curious neighbors. The noise faded as Abeni's calm presence filled the room. She stood tall, her voice soft but firm. Mama, she said gently, before I go, please read this. She extended the brown envelope toward her mother-in-law, her eyes steady and kind. Mama Ronk frowned, suspicious and impatient, but the quiet strength in Abeni's voice made her pause. What nonsense is this? She asked, snatching the envelope from her hand. The neighbors leaned closer, whispering among themselves, wondering what was inside. Kahind watched silently, confused and tense. Abeni didn't look at him. Her eyes stayed on Mama Ronk, who was tearing open the envelope with shaking hands. Just read it, Mama, Ebony said again, her tone calm, almost peaceful. There was no anger, no bitterness, only quiet strength. It was the kind of peace that made everyone in the room fall silent. Even the neighbors outside stopped whispering, sensing that something important was about to happen. For the first time, Mama Ronk looked uncertain. Her anger seemed to fade as she unfolded the papers inside. Her hands trembled, but Ebony didn't move. She stood there, not as a weak woman being thrown out, but as someone who knew the truth and didn't need to shout to prove it. The power in her silence spoke louder than any words could. Kehind looked from his wife to his mother, realizing there was something deeper behind that envelope. Ebony's calm eyes met his for a brief second, and in that moment he understood. She wasn't leaving defeated. She was about to reveal something that would change everything, something that would turn humiliation into honor and silence into strength. Inside the envelope was a neatly folded document, the official house deed. Mama Ronk's hands shook as she opened it, still muttering under her breath. Her eyes moved quickly across the paper, and then they stopped. Her lips parted slightly, and the color drained from her face. The name written on the deed was not Kehind's, it was Ebony's. For a long, heavy moment, no one said a word. The truth hung in the air like thunder before a storm. The same house she had called my son's house, the same home she had thrown Ebony out of, legally belonged to the very woman she had insulted. Kehind leaned closer, his eyes widening as he took the paper from his mother's hand. He read it once, twice, and then looked at Ebony in disbelief. This house is yours," he whispered. Ebony nodded quietly. She didn't speak with pride or anger, only calm truth. The neighbors gasped, murmurs spreading among them like wildfire. Those who had come to watch Ebony's shame were now witnessing Mama Ronk's humiliation. Mama Ronk's mut trembled. "No, this can't be," she said weakly, her voice barely a whisper. "You're lying." But the seal on the document and the lawyer's signature were clear. Her legs wobbled as she clutched the wall for support. The same woman she had called a nobody now owned everything around her. Kehind turned to his wife, guilt filling his eyes. He remembered the time she had quietly supported him, how she never complained even when things were hard. He now understood that behind her silence was strength he had never recognized. Mama Ronk stared at Ebony as if seeing her for the first time. The woman she had mocked for being poor had been the true backbone of their home all along. Ebony stood there, composed and gracious. She didn't smile, she didn't gloat. She simply said, "Mama, I never wanted to embarrass you. I only wanted peace." Her gentle words struck harder than any insult could. The entire street watched in stunned silence as pride bowed before grace, and the truth finally gave Ebony the respect she had always deserved. Kehind had once faced the hardest time of his life. His business was collapsing, debts were piling up, and every door he knocked on was shut in his face. Ebony was there through it all, not with complaints, but with quiet support. She sold her jewelry, skipped her own needs, and prayed for him every night. Still, nothing seemed to work. Then one morning, news came that changed everything. Ebony's uncle, a man who had always loved her dearly, had passed away and left her a large inheritance. The money came as a miracle, but Ebony didn't use it for herself. She saw it as a chance to save her husband and rebuild their future. Without telling anyone, she paid off Kehind's debts and bought the very house they lived in. It was an old, broken-down place at the time, but she used her inheritance to renovate every corner, turning it into the beautiful home everyone admired. When the documents were ready, the lawyer asked whose name should go on the papers. Out of love and respect for her husband, Ebony asked that the family's name appear on the front of the house. But her lawyer, wise and careful, advised her to keep the ownership title under her name for legal safety. She agreed, never imagining that one day, this quiet decision would protect her from humiliation. Kehind never knew the full story. He thought the money had come from a small family loan and his wife's savings. Ebony never corrected him because she didn't want to take credit. All she wanted was peace and happiness in their home. But now, as the truth stood in the open, everyone finally understood the depth of her sacrifice. Mama Ronk's eyes filled with tears as she listened. The same woman she had accused of taking from them had, in truth, been the one giving all along. The pride and bitterness that had driven her melted into shame. Kehind couldn't lift his eyes. Guilt burned in his heart as he realized how deeply he had failed to defend her. Ebony stood quietly, her strength shining brighter than ever, proving that true love doesn't boast. It builds silently, even when no one is watching. Mama Ronk's body went weak as the truth sank in. The paper slipped from her hand, and before anyone could catch her, she collapsed to the floor. The neighbors screamed in panic. Kehind rushed to her side, shaking her gently, calling out, "Mama! Mama!" Someone ran to get water while others gathered around in shock. When a neighbor poured water on her face, Mama Ronk's eyes fluttered open slowly. Confusion filled her gaze at first. Then it all came rushing back. The deed, the name, the truth. She sat up slowly, her clothes soaked, her hands trembling as she looked around. The same people who had come to witness Ebony's humiliation were now staring at her with pity. Her lips trembled as she whispered, "The house, it's hers?" The words tasted bitter in her mouth. Shame covered her like a heavy blanket. She looked at Ebony, who stood quietly a few feet away, her face calm and full of grace. For the first time, Mama Ronk couldn't find words to speak. Her pride, her arrogance, everything she had used to look down on Ebony, all of it crumbled before her eyes. The neighbors began murmuring, shaking their heads. Some whispered, "So this is the real owner." Others said softly, "She insulted her for nothing." The humiliation cut deeper than any wound. Mama Ronk remembered every cruel word she had spoken, every moment she had mocked Ebony's background, every time she had told people her son married a nobody. Now she sat on the floor of a house that didn't belong to her or even to her son, but to the very woman she had called useless. Kehind sat beside his mother, speechless, his face pale with guilt. Ebony quietly picked up the fallen papers and placed them back in the envelope. Her movements were gentle, not proud or vengeful. She looked down at Mama Ronk and said softly, "Mama, I never wanted this to happen. I only wanted peace in our home." Tears filled Mama Ronk's eyes as she realized how wrong she had been. The poor village girl she once mocked had shown more dignity, love, and strength than anyone in that room. For the first time, Mama Ronk bowed her head, her heart heavy with regret, knowing she had lost not to wealth, but to grace. Kehind couldn't hold it in any longer. Overwhelmed with guilt, he fell to his knees before Ebony, his voice trembling as he said, "I'm sorry. I failed you." His eyes filled with tears as he looked at the woman who had quietly carried him through his darkest days. "You stood by me when I had nothing, and I couldn't even protect you when you needed me most," he said softly. The neighbors watched in silence, moved by his words. Ebony's eyes glistened, but she didn't speak yet. She could see his regret was real, and for the first time he finally saw her worth. Mama Ronk, still sitting weakly on the floor, began to cry too. Her voice cracked as she whispered, "Ebony, my daughter, forgive me. I didn't know. I was blind with pride." Her tears ran freely, washing away the arrogance that had once filled her heart. The woman who had once called Ebony a nobody was now begging for her forgiveness in front of everyone. The sight touched even the neighbors' hearts. They had never seen Mama Ronk so broken, so human. The woman who had humiliated another was now humbled by the truth. Ebony stood quietly for a moment, looking at the two people who had hurt her most. Part of her wanted to walk away and never look back, but another part, the kind, gentle part that had always led her, couldn't carry bitterness. She stepped closer, her voice calm and full of grace. "I forgive you," she said softly. "But things cannot go back to how they were." Her tone was gentle but firm. "From now on, respect is the price of love. Without it, a home cannot stand." Her words carried power, and everyone listening felt their weight. Mama Ronk nodded through tears, understanding that this was her daughter-in-law's way of setting boundaries, not seeking revenge. Kehind wiped his eyes and promised to rebuild their marriage on honesty and gratitude. The tension slowly faded as the truth brought peace. Ebony's forgiveness didn't come from weakness. It came from strength. She had turned pain into wisdom and humiliation into honor. That day, everyone learned that true power doesn't shout. It forgives, but never forgets the value of respect. Months later, Mama Ronk sits with her friends under the mango tree, her voice softer than ever. "Never despise a humble woman," she says, shaking her head slowly. "The stone you throw away might be the cornerstone." The women listen quietly, knowing her words carry deep truth. She once looked down on Ebony, calling her useless and poor. Now, she speaks of her with respect, even admiration. Time has humbled her, and the lesson she learned will never leave her heart. Ebony, meanwhile, has blossomed into a woman of strength and grace. Her business now thrives from the same home she was once thrown out of. The compound that once echoed with insults now hums with laughter, customers, and hope. Children run around happily as she gives them sweets, her warm smile lighting up the place. Her name has become known across the town, not for revenge or anger, but for resilience and kindness. Even Kahind, her husband, now works alongside her quietly, grateful for her forgiveness. The bitterness that once clouded their home is gone, replaced by peace and understanding. Ebony moves through each day with calm confidence, no longer the timid woman she once was. She carries herself like a queen, humble, yet full of quiet power. Sometimes, when she's alone in the evening, she stands on the veranda and watches the sunset. The golden light touches her face, and she whispers softly to herself. Grace speaks louder than pride. Her journey from pain to peace is a reminder that no one can dim the light that God has placed within you. Those who once mocked her now seek her advice, and even Mama Ronk often visits her, bringing food and laughter, their relationship healed by time and humility. Ebony's story becomes a tale everyone in the village tells. A story of faith, patience, and grace that turns shame into strength. Spornazi. Besties. Thank you so much for watching to the end. Sparkling Heart, please don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more inspiring stories. Cherry Blossom, see you in the next one. 2 hearts.